you're obviously not a conservative because you believe in pornography in schools. It's like,
Right.
well, it's not quite what's going on.
Totally not what's going on. Right.
You know the day destroys the night, night divides the day. Try to run, try to hide, break on through to the other side, break on through to the other side, break on through to the other side.
Thank you for coming. I appreciate you making the trip out here from Caldwell. I hope it wasn't too bad. A little bit of a schlep, though.
It was very nice, actually. There's still leaves changing color. It was beautiful.
Yeah, it really is. It's an interesting place, though, because things are happening so fast. Because people like me move up, right? It's like you have people from all over moving here for obvious reasons, because it has become this incredible place to live and raise a family and just to exist so much better than other places. So to that end, talk to me. This is your second year in your second term in state legislature. What got you into politics? How long? Tell me your history in Idaho, and then what got you into it.
So I was born and raised here, but I don't think it gives me any more of a claim on it than you deciding that you're going to live here. But there are things. When I was in just a little person, I knew I was going to teach. I knew it, and so I was allowed to do exactly that. And whether it was in a classroom or then as an administrator, where I felt like I was teaching children still how to navigate a really unwieldy life. It's just twists and turns, and it's just a challenge, and help parents as they are trying to train their kids up in the way they should go, and help teachers. And that was a really rewarding career, and I got to do that for 32 years. Well, when I retired from that, I always say you don't retire from life, you just retire from doing that particular work, and then you get to move on to the next work. And so that work started out being giving back to the community through helping with Love Inc., being a facilitator for classes that try to help people not be burdened down by their debt, and to learn freedom, what it means to be free in the Lord from debt financially, and how to set boundaries for yourself so that you can be well and whole and navigate the world as it is. And then being part of Canyon County branch of Assistance League of Boise. So we started that chapter, and we provide clothing for school-age children so that it helps them, that clothing doesn't have to be something that they're worried about, and that they can look like everybody else.
Right. I spoke with Deputy Gomez, Officer Gomez, a very famous SRO, just about a month ago. He has an incredible project providing shoes for people at the Nike store. And he was telling me about an incident where he had an individual who came and had trouble on a bus, and he just got a hold of mom. He's like, hey, I just want you to know, like, I took care of this, but there was a snafu on the bus, and, no big deal. And she said, all right, well, can I come down and talk to my son real fast? I said, yeah, no problem. Mom comes down. She's not wearing shoes. I was like, why aren't you wearing shoes? She said, well, my son and I are actually the same shoe size, and we only have one pair of shoes. So when he goes to school, I don't wear shoes that day. And he was like, so anyway, yeah, the clothing, just meeting the basic needs of some less fortunate people in the community. It's such a wild thing.
It's huge. And that, in as much as you have done it unto the least of these, you have done it unto me. That's what the Lord says. So putting shoes on feet, that's something that I think is a reasonable service. Right. So that, and then I'm part of the Caldwell Lions, because they help people who need glasses and can't afford them to get their eyes checked and get glasses. And so just this idea of giving back to the community. And then I was approached about, listen, why don't you run for this seat? And I thought the seat was going to be open because the person was running for a city council seat. As it turned out, it ended up being that he was going to do both. He was going to stay in the legislature and be on the city council. I ended up prevailing in the primary and in the general, and so it's really was a matter of, there are things in Idaho that when we talk about the Idaho way, what does that mean? And it really means that we're good neighbors. It means that we take care of each other. It means that we don't force other people to do things my way or the highway. It means that it's a place where the economy is strong because we don't overregulate businesses, and that we help people to obtain that American dream. And I think that's always been the Idaho way. And so I wanted to be a part of helping keep those tenets in place, and feel like that I have done that and want to continue to do that.
The nature of freedom right here is so different, right? And the nature of helping people is like, we help people. Well, we don't actually just cut them a check to help them. It's like, no. We help them in that there's opportunity, there's lower regulation, there's flexibility. It's not picking winners and losers. It's allowing people to wholly and completely become themselves, actualize themselves, to become whatever they want to become. Let them do that, right? Whereas in other states, especially on the West Coast, you have such unbelievable burdens on especially small businesses. Oh my gosh, like what a difficult thing to navigate.
On the other hand, you don't want to tell somebody to pull themselves up by the bootstraps if they don't have any boots, like the lady that you were talking about. If you're sharing shoes between two people, hard to pull yourself up by the bootstraps. So how do you give that hand up, not a hand out? How do we help each other, as you said?
This podcast is brought to you by MTU Studios. If you're looking to start a podcast or need content for your business or personal use, content of any type, please reach out to MTU Studios, mtustudios.com. We'd love to help.
Well, one really interesting position that I heard on a national level, it's like 10, 15 years ago. I think it was like a national level politician that was talking about how he didn't support more food stamp reform or something of that nature. He said, listen, this is something people should be doing with people. He said, when I grew up, and he grew up in a very, not well-to-do town, he was saying we had an incredible pantry in our local churches, right? Like the people would have food, and the people could donate to these things. But it was handled on an individual level. It wasn't the state's job or the county's job to make these things happen. And again, I think that's one of the great things about Idaho. You have people that very much believe in helping people, helping individuals, getting things going, and they're not looking for the government. It's not to say there's never a solution there, but they're overwhelmingly, from what I've experienced, not looking to the legislature and other people to say, "Hey, you come and fix this. This is a problem." It's like, no. What can I do to fix this? In the case of Officer Gomez, he took it on himself to start setting up these programs. He didn't start going to the county saying, hey, you guys have to fund this stuff. It was, what can I do? What can we as the citizens and Good Samaritans do?
Right. I think that's the point, is that, but what happens when the church, we have so many denominations, so many different names of things, and then if you aren't part of that, then am I going to help you or not help you? And how many churches do have food pantries? How many churches are? That's why Love Inc., Love in the Name of Christ, they work with the churches and are hoping that the churches are referring people to that program to say, we don't always want to be giving. How do we help you get into a place where not only are you making it yourself, but you're able to give back to others then also? And I think, to your point, to me, that would be one of those things I would put under the Idaho way.
Right. And again, you always want to emphasize, let me teach you how to fish, instead of just giving you a fish.
Exactly.
But it's people, right? It's people teaching you how to fish.
Right.
It's not the government coming in. It's not these like, man, what are the vouchers? I think it's the hotel vouchers in California, where it's like the homeless people get vouchers, and then if there's a vacancy in a hotel, then the hotels have to. I was like, could you imagine being a well-run establishment that happens to be 80% full, so you have 20% vacancies, and you have just normal people coming in needing hotel services, and then you just have like just 20% people, just complete vagrants doing drugs and stuff coming in. That's not what this conversation's about, but
that's good, because I really don't know very much about that.
It's not great. It's not. The bottom line is there are housing problems and there are drug problems and there are law enforcement problems in specific, let's say Northern California, that are not being addressed. The actual root cause is not being addressed. But what some politicians are doing is advocating, attempting to force private entities like private hotels to accommodate people who have drug and mental health disorders and whatnot. It doesn't matter. On the taxpayer dollar as well, just so you know. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Again, you're in your second term, and this last session seemed to be really intense.
It was.
There are a lot of things that were happening. I mean, we have property tax reforms, we have school funding for schools, but the library bill was a huge thing. Walk me back through the library bill for people that aren't familiar with it.
Well, and there were two, and so as you looked at that library bill, I think if you looked at A and B of what they were saying that should not be in the hands of children, I don't believe there would be. I doubt even one person who would say, "Yep, some of those things should be in the hands of little people." But when you get to see other harmful materials, therein lie part of the problem to me, because it's so subjective.
Okay, so when you're saying A and B, you're saying essentially they're saying, hey, look, you can't
pornography.
You can't have
obscenity.
pornography, right? And again, I read through the whole bill. It's like, yeah, you shouldn't. And by the way, I fought against this stuff a lot when I was in California because you have public schools that just have straight pornography in the schools. Like, this is not the educational value of this. Even if you attempted to make an argument that there's value, is like so minuscule, and this is so obscene. So you have things that are clearly lined out, but then you had this ambiguous third category. You're saying that's
to me ambiguous, and to me it was shown to be what the potential problem was. The day after that bill passed on the House floor in Idaho, the day after, a very similar bill had been enacted in Utah. And in Davis County, someone said, well, I think the Bible shouldn't be on public school shelves or in public libraries because of incest, rape, killing massive amounts of people, children, that it's offensive and it's harmful. And so the Bible was removed. Now, since then, it has been put back on the shelves, largely because the person in charge there in Davis County, the elected official, said, I think the Bible is good, and so we're going to put it back on, and the vote was taken, and that's how it went. So to me, there was the solution also, and why I didn't feel like the library bill was really necessary, is that a conservative principle that we've always had is that the government closest to the people is the best. And what's the government closest to the people? The school board, because you elect those people to represent you. And whoever is whether you elect your public library trustees, or whether they're appointed by someone who's elected, therein is the local government. And we saw that play out in Meridian. And what did they decide? They decided it would be way too disruptive for them to take those books off the shelf the way that some were suggesting that they be just banned and taken off. So they had to go back to the drawing board. The same thing happened in the Napa School District. They elected a new slate of officers, 3 out of the 5, and first thing they did, 25 books off. There was such an uproar over that by the people in that community, the taxpayers, the patrons, that they had to rethink that policy, and they had to come up with some kind of process and procedure to actually look at the book and determine, is there literary value there? Is it age appropriate to the group we're looking at? This is the proper role of government, in my mind. The government closest to the people, not the state deciding that we're going to parent for you. We just passed a bill saying parental rights, but now we're going to say, well, we can't trust parents to know what their kids are reading in school or what they're getting in the library, the public library. So we at the state, we're going to pass this. And not only that, but we're going to let taxpayers, or maybe not taxpayers, sue for tax dollars that was the rest of the bill. Started out at $10,000, dropped down to $2,500, but it was still one of these things where you could keep a school district or a public library constantly in litigation for taxpayer dollars. So not only are taxpayer dollars defending whatever the process, the book, but if they lose, they're paying tax dollars out to someone. But if they win, there's no compensation. We're just out more taxpayer dollars to defend and to keep the book on the shelves or decide to take it off. But that, to me, did not make sense. It's just not, when I talk about what it means to be a conservative Republican, the state deciding that doesn't make sense to me. It makes more sense to me for it to happen at the most local level.
Gotcha. When you talk about giving the responsibility to the parents, I think that some people were concerned that they were saying, look, parents can't go to the library with their 16-year-old or 15-year-old every single time the kid goes to the library. I mean, especially if you have a great library system, people are going there to do homework and going there to study or meet with groups and whatnot. The parents largely aren't going with them, right? Or if you have parents not going to the school libraries. They're not physically going to the school libraries, or most aren't, and inspecting the school libraries. So I think some of the concern is like, look, excuse me, parents don't directly know what their kids have access to. So one of the arguments that I heard for the bill is like, listen, we have to take some larger steps to make sure that parents have faith that their children aren't getting access to obscene material, right? So that was kind of the argument for like, on the state level, we have to do this. But what I'm hearing you say is there are many layers beneath the state level that give agency to those in the area, right? So like the Meridian Library, the Caldwell Library System, or the Nampa Library System, they can figure out, okay, what do we want here? And we can inform our parents, and the parents, can have a say or however they want to have their voice heard. And again, there were a lot of people showing up for a lot of different meetings over the last year or two that were very upset about stuff. So people had a capacity to have their voices heard. But what you're saying is, instead of the state doing it, let's let the localities do it. Let's let the local governments determine what's appropriate by allowing people to talk about it and then essentially vote on it.
That is the American way, is civil discourse. Let's talk about it. Now, there are those who say, well, we tried to do that, like in Nampa, for example. I have a friend who said, we tried that, and so they finally went to the extreme measure of checking. Some of them checked out books never to bring them back because they hoped that they wouldn't replace them because they thought they were just not appropriate. So there is an issue. And so the second library bill that I alluded to earlier, it looked at, okay, A and B, totally get that. As far as obscene and pornography.
Right. A and B are just indicating things that you can't have.
Very
that are
clear.
Very common sense.
Yes. And it's that if I know it when I see it, it's pretty obvious. But then it's saying that instead of that we put a process in, that we put these processes into place and clearly marked where things are. And then we trust that parents, maybe they're not going there with their 16-year-old, but I know a lot of parents who they buy cell phones for their kids, smartphones, and they love them and they trust them, but they trust but then verify. And so they're looking to see, where are they going? What websites are they visiting? What are they watching? Who are they talking to, and when are they talking to them? And then they institute family rules about when is social media acceptable and when do we set it aside. You don't sleep with it on your chest and wake up every time and answer all through the night when friends are not sleeping and doing whatever they're doing. So this idea that we don't believe that parents can be aware of what their kid is doing regardless of their age, I just don't buy it. I think I know too many parents now that I consider parents, reasonable parents, they know they can't protect them from everything, but they do their best to put in reasonable guardrails for their children. And then when they step over those past what's permissible. There are consequences that they employ so that it makes it so that the kid's going to think twice about doing that again or wanting to earn that trust back so that they can continue on. This is what we need to do for our children before we send them off to college. And that's what my parents did for me. Is it was really clear to me what was acceptable and not acceptable, what I should be filling my mind with and what I shouldn't be filling my mind with. We talked about these things at the dinner table, not really always in a very specific, thou shalt not do this, but almost like parables, like stories of people that are in the news or that we are friends, and we would talk through those things. And this is how we train them up to have clear parameters about how they want to live their life and how they want to feed. Who are they going to feed? Their better self or this other self?
Right. What was the feedback from your constituents? Because obviously you're elected by the people to go out and uphold the principles that they like. What was the feedback from them? Did you get guidance from them? Did you get feedback from them like, hey, look, we like this bill, or like, hey, look, this bill is dangerous? What was that process for you?
So I got some of both, but overwhelmingly it's not your place as a state legislator to be making this call. And that they felt like it was the beginning of censorship and authoritarianism, and somewhere that they did not want Idaho to go. You say that you don't want a nanny state, and yet here you are now suggesting that you're going to start telling us what can and can't be in our libraries. And you say local control, but now you're going to say, except now, because I'm going to decide for you, because I know better than you what should be there. Then there were those who said, it's a no-brainer, just like it was said on the floor, no-brainer, and it's very black and white to that person. And I get that, and I used to live in a really black and white world too, but I'm older now, and the reality is there are shades of gray, there are nuances. To me, like I said, pornography, obscenity, very clear, not appropriate. But other harmful materials, so much in the eye of the beholder. And that's overwhelmingly what I heard from my district, is that there were persistent, loud voices about, if you don't vote for this, then we're coming after you. And they were good for their word. But the others, maybe not as loud, but greater in number, were, we don't feel like we should have to come and tell you what makes sense. And what makes sense is the government doesn't start censoring reading materials.
And again, when you're talking about the nuances and shades of gray here, it's yes, it's a no-brainer to keep pornography and things of that nature away from children. But that's not all that was in the bill, right? Like, obviously, you've made the point several times. Other harmful material. Okay, well, who gets to decide that, right? And what, like you're saying, an argument could be very easily made for the Bible, right? Okay, we didn't mean the Bible. We meant the other harmful material, right? So harmful by whose standards,
right.
and who gets to the ultimate decision on that? And aside from that, just the practical insanity that would be delivered if you started allowing people to find the local libraries and the schools for $2,500 a pop. It's like, why not make it 100,000, right? Because all you have to do to absolutely disrupt the entire workings is get 100 people to say, hey, my kid was able to check this out, or my kid was able to peruse this. Well, here, I need $2,500 from you right now, right? Like, that's not. I understand there has to be something that actually enforces the measures, but
sure.
the $2,500, it's like, that's an astronomical amount of money for a local library system at any scale. And one of the arguments that Governor Little said in his veto was that he indicated that it might be it might be a resolution for the local library systems to actually just start banning minors from the libraries, because you might have a library worker who's not, or an argument made about an obscene or inappropriate or harmful material. It's like, well, if everybody can start making these arguments, we're in trouble. So again, I'm not saying I know the right solution here, obviously, but I know enough to realize there are a lot of gray areas or problematic aspects to this bill. So when people say, hey, look, this is black and white, it's like, okay, which part of it?
Right.
Right? Like, of course, pornography, obscene material, that's black and white. But everything else is so far from black and white that it's kind of like, well, how do you mean black? Like, what do you mean shut and close case? Like,
Right.
that's not that clear.
Yes, and I even said that on the House floor, that to me it's a disingenuous argument to decide everything is one way, all one way or all the other. You're either for pornography in the hands of kids or you're not. So to your point, that is to me a very lazy argument, and not willing to allow or know that people are going to be, they look a little bit farther than that. All we have to do is be watching TV in the Camp Lejeune, if you've ever lived there, or One Call, That's All, and we're going to gather up all these cases, and then we're going to start just going through a school, pulling all these cases together, and you only make money if we make money, kind of a thing. This is not how we want to be doing things. And the other part of that is, so the other library bill, which I believe will come back as well, says, okay, we have no problem with saying these things should not be in libraries, none at all. And I would believe that for the most part, they aren't. So
When you say they aren't, what do you mean?
that there are not the pornography and obscene materials in most public libraries.
Right.
But if we're going to say, here's a clear definition of what those things are, then I have no problem with us saying, then they can only be in these areas. And that if you are going to make them available to someone who it's not age appropriate for, and some of that stuff, okay, so let's just go back to some of that stuff I don't think is appropriate for any age. Sure. But okay, so
yeah, some of the hot button books out there right now are just overwhelming. They're so disgusting.
Over the
It's just,
top.
oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I'm
and
not
by the
talking
way,
about those.
You can't, like, if I wanted to pop one up on the screen right now, this has actually happened to me. In a fight against these books, I did several conversations and podcasts, video podcasts with people discussing these books, and they got yanked from YouTube.
Yep.
Because the author comes after you saying, you can't display images from my book. I have copyright. Now, for me to fight that, right? Like, and again, I could pop one up right now, but the video would get taken down because there would be copyright issue. For me to fight that as a content creator, I actually have to start a legal process and go through this whole wrangle, which is insane. So it's kind of like, there are some books out there that are just so disgusting that you're like, this has no place in any public
hands.
library. Right. Right. And like, listen, if you want it on Amazon and you want to have that book in your house, like, that's totally, it's none of my affair,
Absolutely.
right? Like, behind closed doors is your business.
Right.
But for a public library, so again, to your point, I agree with you. There are
Well,
some books that just shouldn't be out there.
And to your point, in the House Education, when we had somebody come who was going to read passages out of a book she thought weren't appropriate, and I didn't allow it. I did allow her to pass the book around the committee so that we could see what she was talking about.
Sure.
But if it's so horrible that it shouldn't be in the hands of little people, I wasn't willing for her to read it out loud into public record over public television that could be going into in real time homes with children hearing those things because they're homeschooled or they're home ill or whatever that is. Now, are they all tuned in to Channel 4 and watching our House proceedings? Probably not. On the other hand, you can't say on the one hand, this shouldn't be out for public consumption, and then me allow it to be out there.
What a catch-22 though, because again, let's say I have book A, and this fictitious inappropriate book. I have book A. Book A is currently in the public schools, and I bring it to this committee and I say, hey, book A shouldn't be here. And they're like, well, hang on a sec. It's inappropriate, so you can't, or you're arguing that's inappropriate, so we can't hear it over the air. It's like, but book A is already in the schools, right? So like, how do you get the word out on those things? How do you have open and honest discourse without allowing for the thing in question to be, book A to be displayed? It's like, okay, this is what's actually in book A.
So what you do is you go to your local school board, if in point of fact book A is on the library shelf, and you say, look, I'm going to give this to you, and I don't want you reading it out loud in the board meeting, but does this represent what this community, our mores, our standards, or not? And when I was in high school, I read One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I was a junior in high school. I did my book report on it. And I said, I have never seen the F word so many times in my life. I mean, that is a word that was not allowed in our house. And that book, the checking out of that book spiked to a place that then a parent said they're not comfortable with it. So our librarian put it behind the desk, and a parent had to call and give permission for their student to check that book out.
What a common sense solution.
There you go.
What an absolute just basic, it's like, listen, call whenever, leave a message. I got an answering machine here. If, Matt calls in and Matt says, I'm, data, check out, like, so simple, right? If you want consent, this is a very simple thing to do.
So one thing I wanted to say about the other library bill is that I certainly understand that money talks. And that was when I talked with Representative Jaron Crane, that was one of the things that he said about there has to be teeth in it, in the bill, or why bother? And I thought, I get that. I understand why he's saying that. And so the other bill, I think it's coming back too. And what it's going to suggest is that if those materials are found, pornography or obscene materials, that we withhold part of their appropriations. Well, that makes more sense, because now instead of taxpayers suing for taxpayer dollars, we are pulling back taxpayer dollars because somebody is showing that they are not making prudent choices about what they're putting on the shelves. That makes more sense to me. And that's why when we were talking about the phones, and I understood that argument too, that they're saying, gosh, I pay for that phone, so that, I have control over that, but I'm also paying for those books in the library, so I should have a say in what's there. I understand that argument. So the other library bill, the one that says we will withhold appropriations, that makes more sense to me.
And here's the thing. So frequently, the right answer, or the most effective bill, or the most effective solution is not the first one sent out. Like, these things need to get beat up. It's like any dumb idea that I have. It's like, I start out with a stupid idea and like, that's trash. It's like, okay, but there's some good in here, right? So like, can I massage this a little? And you come up with another iteration, I tell my wife, finally, I'm like 10 iterations down in my own head. I'm like, hey, hon, what do you think about this? She's like, all right, well, it's dumb because of this. And then, you go back.
Now
you
to the next iteration.
Right. So you have iteration after iteration.
So Representative Brent Crane said the same thing. And he was on one of those, I can't remember, it was on public television, but he was saying that rarely does a bill make it through on the first go round.
Well, Representative Brent Crane, you and I were of the same mind on that one.
Yeah.
And so this is part of the process, which is why what happens after in this story is so odd to me. So you largely agree that, hey, pornography, obscene material, this has no place in our children's hands. Like, let's be clear on that. Other things in the bill, though, for instance, other harmful material being ambiguous, at least in your mind, in some people's minds. The financial structure, and again, I like that idea of withholding funding versus people suing for the 20, like, that's great. Okay. So like, we're massaging this out, we're working it out. But you say, hey, look, in this current form, this bill is not one that I want to get behind. The sentiment is there. I agree with that largely, but we need to iron out some of these other things. Then comes this onslaught of like, you're the devil, right? Like, what happened after your vote that led to people censoring you and criticizing you roundly? Talk to me about that. What happened?
That was really interesting to me too, because like I said to my husband, somebody sent me a picture of it said Playboy and it had my picture on it. And I told my husband, oh, it's the only way I'm going to be on Playboy covers. Somebody photoshops it in, right?
I'm in the middle of drinking coffee. I almost spit coffee.
Well, see, it's hilarious to me too. And I just think, there are ways of showing that you're displeased with someone that are more probably mature and acceptable. Unhappy, okay, I get that. But again, this idea that everything is just a black and white, that we're not willing to. So, is it true that I voted against the library bill? Yes. But is their characterization of why I did, is it honest? And is it true? And the answer to that is no, it's not. And so to me, it was one of those things where I thought, I don't understand why somebody would want to, well, I guess I do understand, because actually what was told me about a different bill that I think was the same as this one, that they are wedge bills. And I said, well, what's a wedge bill? And they said, well, it means that it's to drive a wedge and to clearly define sides, and that it's this idea that we win no matter what. If the bill passes, we win. If the bill doesn't pass, we win, because we get people on the record that we can then call, in my case, that I'm not really a Republican, I'm not really conservative, when in point of fact, I will still maintain I'm as conservative as anybody needs to be, but I am a reasonable, rational human being who knows that not very rarely is anything as cut and dried as how we want to sometimes present it. So when you get these things in the mail that say they're this liberal rhino person, and here are the bills, you might want to dig into those a little bit more, but what they're counting on is people won't, because they're busy living their lives, they're raising their families, they're going to work, they're in their churches, they're out on the lake on Saturday, they're not reading through H314, for heaven's sake. Right. So I think that's the challenge that we're in right now, is that we can say things that we know has maybe some basis of truth, some kernel of truth, but we twist it so it really isn't an honest depiction of who that person is or what that person is about.
Right. I have a very dear friend back in California. He's actually from Canada, and it's very liberal. It's fine. Like, he's still my friend, right?
Yeah, you love him anyway.
I love him. Sometimes, though. Anyway, so he was wild. He and his wife would have the news running at all time of the day when I'd go over to their house and see him. They just lived a couple houses up. And I would go over and they'd be worked up over something. Yep. Just like, in a tizzy. And so I go over there one time, like, can you believe Trump? And I was like, oh God, here he goes again. I'm like, no, I first off, I have no idea what you're talking about. Right. And it was when we gotten pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord. Okay. And he was like, I can't believe how much he hates. This is what my buddy says. I can't believe how much he hates the environment. I'm like, how do you mean? He's like, well, he pulled us out of the Paris Climate Accord. I'm like, and he did that because he hates like redwood trees? Like, why did he do that? Right. And they're like, well, obviously he hates. And I got so frustrated. Right. I got so frustrated just with this kind of narrative that I actually went home and took like an hour or two to research what was going on with that. And it turns out I read this, like the majority of this 45-page legal brief that essentially said, all right, look, here's the problem. As it's written, the Paris Climate Accord is actually more of a treaty because it's giving power, governing power over individual states to a foreign entity, right, outside of the United States. Now, you can do that. Like there's a mechanism in the United States government to allow the states to be beholden to outside entities, but they're called treaties, right? So, and to do a treaty, you have to there was like a voting mechanism and a process. You have to go through all this stuff. Like, we didn't do that. So that makes the Paris Climate Accord not even really legally enforceable because all the states have to argue is that they weren't given a decision. So whatever benefit you think you would have gotten out of this is actually null and void because it's not really enforceable because it's a treaty and it's not like this blah, 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 blah. So I go back and I present this to him. I'm like, but look, man, like, this is a really long 2-hour deep dive into why it maybe he loves the environment but feels this isn't the proper legislation. And it was like in one ear out the other. He's like, or really he just hates the environment. Yeah. So again, I understand what you're saying, that there's the nature of wedge bills and wedge candidates really seem to be popping up because as we reduce the actual dialogue that people are having, down from 20-minute conversation to 10-minute conversation to 10-second soundbite or 200 characters, whatever it might be now on X. The point is you have people that are relying more and more on this reductionist black and white position, and that's harmful for everyone,
Right.
right? So aside from that, what actually happened to you afterwards? Because again, I became very familiar with you based on the KTVB 20-minute piece where you got about 10 seconds to explain your case, which is why I really wanted to understand more about it. But what happened, right? What was the backlash? And again, you said the majority of constituents that you heard from, although they weren't the loudest and most aggressive communicators, the majority of them were not in favor of this. So you were, as far as you could tell, representing the will of your constituents.
Correct. I really do believe that. And I'm going to say right now, I absolutely believe that the people who are so aggravated with me and are pushing those negative campaigns, I don't doubt their sincerity. I think they actually think what they're doing is right and that they're saving people from a fate worse than death. I get that. I disagree, and I believe that the way that I am representing actually is in the collective best interest, and that if you look at my votes, and this is back to something that when we were talking earlier about, if you look at all of my votes up against even the Republican platform, what the preponderance of those votes actually fall fairly well in line with what we would consider a conservative approach to governance and a light hand of government, and believing that we the people are in the best position to determine how we're going to live our lives. So individual liberties, you can see bill after bill that whether they pass both houses and made it to the governor for being signed or not might not be the issue, but they picked out 6. They found 6 that they said that didn't line up with the party platform.
When you say they found 6, you're saying that the people that are your biggest opponents found 6 particular votes that they objected to, 6 particular votes that you made that they objected to, that they felt were demonstrating that you're not a, quote, real conservative.
Yes.
Okay.
And it started with, we were censured over the library bill, in particular by the state party when they met in Chalice, and that was like 200 people. And then it came to the Canyon County Central Committee, and they voted to censure as well. And then District 11, they decided that's the district that I'm in, yeah. And so they allowed me to come to a meeting, and it was really nice because they gave me the information that they were operating off of. Here are the bills, and here are her positions, and this is why we think it doesn't follow the party platform. Sure. Really fair to me, so I wasn't having to guess what was on their mind and which bills in particular that they were concerned about. And so I was offered the platform to just go through each one of those. They had a moderator, and he would ask the question, and I would get to answer my response to that.
Now, was this I'm sorry to interrupt, was this a public meeting? Like, was this broadcast so people could understand your position? Because the censuring is public, right? Like, so they let the state know, and then the district and everything, like, hey, we have taken steps to censure Representative Yamamoto. But when you go to defend yourself, did they say, hey, she actually had some good points, or like, hey, these were her reasons and we still don't think that those...
Well, that remains to be seen, because they decided to postpone making a decision until after the city elections and the school board elections. Because
oh, great! So this is coming up. Their decision's coming, pending.
Yeah, so it's pending.
Oh, great.
To be determined. And I was told before, that it wasn't wise. It wasn't even prudent for me to show up. But I was elected to represent those folks too, even the people who disagree with my votes, and I should be able to give them an answer for why I did what I did. And so I appreciated having that opportunity. And how it was designed was that question asked, answered, no rebuttal, no
back and
debating.
forth. Sure.
And so then there were questions from the audience, and a lot of those I felt like I'd already answered, and I tried to give a little more information because if they're still asking the question, then maybe I didn't do a very good job of answering it. But what it boils down to is how do you look at what does local control mean? What does it mean to trust that people, individuals, are going to make the best decision for themselves and their families? I might not agree with it, but you give them the liberty to make those decisions.
Right.
What does it mean for the lightest hand of government, and that we don't get to sit on high and start deciding for you in your daily life what you can and can't do? So these are the things that, to me, I felt like within the platform there were inconsistencies or places where it contradicts those to me underlying principles of what it means to look at our government through a conservative Republican lens.
Okay. So you are a state level legislator. What do you think the role of the state should be then? Because what you're saying is, look, I didn't like this because there's too much government overreach, essentially. So what are bills that you voted on last year that you felt were within your scope of decision?
So let's just start with appropriations, because that's one of the things that I probably get beat up the most about, is that voted for almost all the appropriation bills. Yes, I did, because it's a pretty conservative principle that we pay our bills. And someone long before me in the state legislature decided, when they were determining, when our U.S. Constitution says provides for the general welfare in that case, as we've already talked about, isn't just continual handouts,
Sure.
hand up perhaps, but what are those things? Roads, defense, education, health and welfare, the Health Care Act, all of those things were determined by others that were duly elected to represent Idahoans, to say this is the proper role of government, that we are going to provide these services. And in order to provide those services, we have agencies and departments that oversee those things and are supposed to make sure that things are done in the way that it was intended, and that it gets to the people who it needs to get to, that we aren't waiting in lines forever at the DMV or whatever it is.
Right.
All right, so on and on. Those things have been determined. And then we have the Joint Finance Appropriation Committee, and they divide those between 20 people, divide those all up. They listen to the different department heads and agency heads, talk about what they're doing. They've been talked to well before that, they being those agencies and department heads, about, you don't have carte blanche here. These are taxpayer dollars. How do we do what we need to do and do it in the most efficient, effective way possible, and that we're not gouging the taxpayer for that? So when those bills those appropriations go through those folks, almost all on that committee are Republicans. And they're with a watchful eye and asking not just superficial questions, digging down in to say, why does the Idaho State Police, why do they need a helicopter, for example? Is it not working to contract it when the times you do need it? And then they had to balance and say, well, it would be helpful, but the long-term costs of keeping that and maintaining and the training and all that doesn't seem like that's going to be the best expenditure.
Sure.
And so now somebody could say, okay, well, so are they not supporting the Idaho State Police because they didn't give them that? Well, no. And again, we're back to that disingenuous either or, black and white, binary choice. You're either this and all for police, or you're this and you voted against them. That's just a crazy concept. So all of this to say, those folks have worked those appropriation bills. They come then to the House floor and they're telling us, this is what we think is reasonable. And we are looking at cost of living. We are looking at that if more people are moving into the state, it's going to cost more for this agency to oversee. We don't want people disregarding fences and ruining somebody's property. But in order to do that, you need some sort of enforcement, and we don't have enough people to do it. So on and on it goes. They come to the floor, and we vote on whether we're going to approve those expenditures or not. And so I trust the people who are working those bills, that they have done their due diligence and that they're doing their best to keep costs low, and that they recognize that taxpayer dollars are precious, and that we need to not just be throwing them out at willy-nilly and letting people do. When we find out that something isn't being done appropriately, believe me, those hard questions are asked. When health and welfare during the Pride Week were present and handing out materials, that was questioned to say, is that really the proper role? And if there are government dollars expended, is that how we want them to be expended? So those things the hard questions are asked. And so when those bills come to the floor, then I listen to the debate. And if the debate is just no, that's not a reason to vote no. So what I would suggest is that for those who really believe that the spending is out of control, there are folks on that committee who are of that mind. Get into those bills, find for us where the waste is, and then let's pass legislation that says that that's not what that department, that agency, or that component of that department and agency, that we are not going to expend funds there anymore. And I have not seen any legislation in the 3 sessions I've been there to that. Only just no. Just vote no.
Right. And again, that doesn't help, right? Because just saying no because we don't like it, and again, you just come back to 314. You can just go black and white. It's like, okay, but we don't have to necessarily pass an imperfect bill. We can say it's 75% good. You want the 90% good bill, like or 95, or give me 85%, right? Let's get a little bit closer. Is there any possible way to reconcile some of these problems or smooth some of these issues over,
right?
And go from there?
Because one of the things I ran on is that I would look at every piece of legislation and determine what were the unintended consequences, and if there was a negative, then let's mitigate those negative components. So I agree. We need to not sacrifice. I don't think you should sacrifice the good for the perfect, but neither do I think that you should take something that's going to prove problematic in the future and not be what you really intended it to do, just because you can say we did it and stand on top of a momentary hill that you know.
Right. And again, don't sacrifice the good for the perfect, but also don't accept something that can easily be, or obviously at least attempt to be improved, right? Like put the work in to try to improve it.
Make it right.
Now, one of the big things that was curious to me about the KTVB piece was there was this question of, look, the party on the state level and then the more local level is criticizing these legislators, these politicians, but you're criticizing them because they didn't act in the way that you wanted them to act. And it did not appear to me, and again, I don't know these people, I'd love to talk to them, but it didn't appear to me that the people that were criticizing you were taking into account your constituents' opinions, and the constituents, of course, who elected you. What do you think your obligation is to your constituents versus to your overall party platform?
That's a really good question. I think one of the things to remember is that when I first signed on the platform that I agreed to it, they still gave you an opportunity to say if there was something in there that you didn't agree with, that you could say why it would be different. Then I signed off on the next group, but then they met in Chalice and they put some things into place there that I have to say now. I will be saying, well, there are exceptions, and here they are. So I think there's that component of it, and I think the other part of that is that sometimes people will think that because they and 5 other people, 10 other people, 20 other people, or 212 or however many were at Chalice, that they all agree that this is good, right, and the only way to think, that's how, and if anybody knew better, they would think that way too. That's what I keep hearing. Like even when I was in Twin Falls, when there were 600 and some of us, someone sitting next to me said something to the effect of, well, the average person isn't very smart. The average person isn't studying these things. They don't know. And so we need to tell them who the more conservative candidates, the true conservatives, the true Republicans, who they are, and that we need to decide for them, because otherwise we're going to lose what's best. And so we're operating from this fear and that has fomented into also anger. And those are really powerful motivators. And I think that's what we're seeing here, is that they believe that they are. It reminds me of, and I have to be careful here because I got in trouble on one of those pieces. They felt like I was name calling, and that wasn't my intent. But
right, and again, I really want to point out, like you said earlier, you do believe that they feel this way. That they feel like, hey, we are fighting the
good fight,
right? And by the way, I don't even know that they're not. Like, I'm an idiot, right? Like, let's start with that premise. I'm wondering about, like, hey, how do you guys think about this, right? Like, how do you think about this? How do they think about it? What, right. Who are you responsible to? Maybe
but
you're
once
responsible.
You decide that I'm the only one who knows the truth, and you either believe like I do or you're the enemy, that as soon as you hit that, I think that that's problematic, because the very freedoms and liberty that you propose to uphold, you begin then to step on the toes of somebody who doesn't look at it just like you do. That's a problem.
It's a huge problem.
And once I decide someone is my enemy, then I can villainize them. Then I can dehumanize them. Then I can say things about them that are maybe there's some modicum of truth, but holistically really not true at all. And I can make them out to be that they're in league with the devil. You know, I've been told to repent and turn to Jesus. I did that a long time ago, and I'm a work in progress, to be sure. But one thing I know for absolute certain, I am called to love others as I love myself. I am called to be good even to my enemies. And to that end, I refuse to have them. I refuse to call someone my enemy, even if they are saying mean things about me, untrue things about, cruel, mocking, all these things that my earthly self would want to say, well, that's not right, that's not fair. Well, you know, fair or not, that's how they choose to represent what they believe and how they want to protect others from, you know, apparently people like me. Well, people like me are people who believe that everybody deserves to live their life in a way that is right to them. And I don't think I get to decide that you have to live your life to the 10 Commandments, even though I aspire to live my life in line with those things, any more than I can say that I'm going to pass a law that everybody needs to accept the Lord Jesus as their Savior and then live that way. Well, wouldn't that be, that is just antithetical to what he wants. He's saying, live your life in such a way that you are a light in a dark place, and that you draw people to what is good and pure and honest and right and whatever is of good report.
Right.
And to me, what is of good report and pure and honest and true isn't to disparage, mock people, say things that are not true, and believe that all is fair and love and warfare and politics.
Politics.
I won't. Yeah. I refuse. I don't think that's what I do not believe, and what I am. Like I said, the people who are contacting me either through snail mail, believe it or not, email, text, messenger, Facebook, all of these modes, in person. I was in downtown Boise, and someone stopped me and said how much they appreciated somebody with a backbone. And I said, well, other people would have another name for that. And they said, well, you actually are speaking up and standing up and holding firm to the things that we actually believe are true of what it means to be an Idahoan, that we are more tolerant, more accepting, more willing to acknowledge that other people make choices about how they're going to live that we might not agree with, but as long as they're not forcing us to live that way, live and let live.
So, and again, we're a lot of things there, but to be clear, obligation to the party or to the constituents?
Well, so to a degree, there is some of both. If you're going to say you're a Republican, then and you're going to fly under that brand, that flag, it says that largely you should be following, but once it becomes 100% purity test, and I know they'll say that isn't that, but if you look at all the votes, over 300 votes we took, and they're coming up with 6 that they say that weren't in line with what they want, that seems to me, okay, so some are more important than others. Okay, I guess that's true. But on some of the big ones, like vaccine mandates, abortion, if I'm in line with those, then, this whole, it has to be 100% or all or nothing.
Right. 6 out of 300 is 98% accuracy.
Yeah. So then I have to say, okay, well, then who elected you? And thousands and thousands of people voted. Now they're trying to say, well, they shouldn't have because of this. Those same people in November will get to decide whether or not, or in May rather, at the primary, they're going to get to decide if that's what they believe, that they're going to believe this, or they're going to look at the preponderance of evidence and what I've done over time and say, balance that out. So to me, I have to look out for the constituency. And most importantly, I follow the U.S. Constitution and the Idaho Constitution. That's what you raise your hand and give your oath of allegiance to, not necessarily not the party platform 100%. To me, that party platform is getting longer and longer and longer. And I think maybe they need to go back to their preamble that says this is what we believe, and then leave some of those policy issues to get hashed out like the legislative process is designed to do. It's messy business, and it takes a while, as we said earlier. There are iterations of things before you get to something that is actually a reasonable and considered good, solid legislation.
Right. And again, it's so difficult even to say, okay, well, I was voting based on my obligation to the party or the constituents, because if we just look at this one vote, as we've said several times over, it's not that you're against the things that they likely would want you to be against. Like, you don't believe pornography and obscene material has a place in public schools and public libraries. That was all in the bill.
No.
Right? So
unfortunately, there's that.
The conflict of principles here is just, it appears to me to be very, very obvious, which is, okay, look, we don't want this. Fine. We don't want A. But this kind of, like, the $2,500 fine, that's kind of, that may not be the best way to do that. So, okay, we don't like this. It's like you go down the line, 2, 3, 4, 5 different objections. Like, well, we can improve this, but you're not observing that the vote was, hey, I'm not saying overwhelmingly no. Like, I believe my vote is actually in line with the conservative platform, which is more limited government, right? More local control. Let's not put the libraries in a financially precarious position. All of these different things like that, those appear to be conservative principles. But again, just taking a snapshot, it's like, well, you're obviously not a conservative because you believe in pornography in schools. It's
right.
like, well, it's not quite what's going on.
It's totally not what's going on. Right. That's
a lot. It's a lot.
It is a lot. And it weighs heavy because there is that tendency that you want to go on and, to defend yourself and to say, hey, I don't. And part of me just thinks, I think it's, in some ways, that's a fruitless exercise. I think what you do need to do is give opportunities, just like this one, for people to see who you are, hear what you have to say, and then match up what you say with what, what you do, and ask the questions. The people that I appreciate the most are the constituents who call and say, why did you vote no? Help me understand. And then after we talk, they just say, well, that makes perfect sense. Well, thank you. And, and so, man, I really appreciate, that you're telling me that. And I think that's what, and then I've had others who've said, on the face of it, it would seem like that would be something that I would count on you to vote yes for, but there must be some reason why you didn't. And I'm going to trust you that there was a good reason. And I want you to know I support you. I think they should call and say why, so that they know, even in the church I was going to, they said, ask her about that vote. And so he did. And then he, after I explained, he said, well, can you narrow that down to just a sentence or two? Because I'm not going to remember all that. And I just
Can you put some work in, buddy? Can you just try?
And I thought that it was an honest ask. Yeah. But the problem is that if we have reduced our understanding of what's going on politically to sound bites and bumper stickers, somebody like me will lose every time, because I think we should be more thoughtful and that we need to work our way through, here's the rationale. And if you look at all of these things in its totality, it makes sense. If you're willing to only look at this much of it, you can make a decision, but you're missing out on some of the most important components of how is that actually going to roll out into somebody's everyday life.
Right. And how about this? Here's your one sentence. If enacted, there's opportunity for people to say that the Bible is obscene and inappropriate and harmful, and it will be removed from these public institutions. Would you like that to happen? That's it, right? Like, that's your one sentence. Oh, you don't want that to happen. Okay, so there's nuance here. So, okay, how about the Bible's okay? How do we figure out how other things are okay? And how about the punishment is not a $2,500 fine the second somebody tries to check out a Bible?
Right.
Right? Like, let's walk this back a little bit. That's all you need to know. It's imperfect. There are obvious pitfalls. And that's not to say we won't get to the finish line with largely the idea, which is there's some enforceable restriction on pornography and obscene material in public schools and public libraries. Wonderful. Let's get there. Let's just keep massaging the problem until we get there.
Right. And I think that's what you heard from Governor Little in his rationale for the veto. And I guess I would, as we look at this more in the totality of, I find it horrifyingly fascinating that the very people who have been considered the establishment conservative Republicans have helped bring Idaho to this place where we were one of the first states to rebound from the pandemic, and one of the lowest in taxes and strongest economies. But now those very same people are being called not Republican, not conservative, and they're elitist and they're the cronies. And I just think, gosh, I think we owe a debt of gratitude to those who have kept their eye on the ball about how do we make Idaho as economically sound and fiscally responsible. We always pay our bills. We don't overextend. We cut back regulations on businesses. We try our level best to let people have their freedom in this state, which is exactly why people come. And then they're so worried that those of us who helped get us to this place are now going to be the ones who cause its undoing. This is nonsensical to me, and I don't buy it. I think that we are people that we know what we have. We grew up here, and we haven't changed our opinion about what it means to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We pay taxes. We're business owners. We are people who are trying our level best to make sure we raise up kids in the way they should go, give them a quality education so that they can go forward and maybe, just maybe, they want to stay in Idaho and raise their families here. These are the people that some are vilifying and saying that we're less than and that we are not deserving of representing Idahoans. I don't buy it.
Julie, I've had you for a long time. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for saying your piece. I appreciate your efforts to bring nuance and what you feel is best to Idaho and the constituents that you represent. Is there anything else you'd like to say in closing?
I guess what I would want to say is that Idaho is a really great place to live, and there is room enough for all of us. And this idea that we have to just be either or, that there can't be, let's come and reason together and come up with solutions that really are beneficial and don't leave people feeling like that they don't belong or they're not a part of this great state of Idaho. That's where the real work is, and that's a part of what I want to be a part of.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again for coming. Hopefully the first of many. Have a great holiday.
You also. Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by MTU Studios. If you're looking to start a podcast or need content for your business or personal use, content of any type, please reach out to MTU Studios. MTUstudios.com. We'd love to help.